the ideology is dropped into this group, and not just affect that one person, it instantaneously affects how those two people interact with each other. And how those two people interact with each other is how affects how these other people react to each other. And then you have a group. Then what happens when you have a fragmented group of people who don't know how to be individuals and to associate with each other in a social way without a doctrine, without an ideology? What happens? They become fragmented in that lack of individuality, that lack of sovereignty. In the most perverse, in the most ironic way, is what draws them together, because they're looking for that answer. They're looking for that truth. This is especially with gangs. They're looking for that certainty. Hello, everyone. Welcome back to Well-Rounded Fool, an exploration of atrocity. This is part 2 of Nietzsche, Postmodernism, in the Death of God. We've covered a lot on this series, and we're going to pick up right where we left off from part 1, when we were talking about Nietzsche's philosophy, how he first started questioning, the essences of truth, what was actually the basis of why something like truth would even exist. He was, fundamentally curious about a lot of things. Why something like truth would be something necessary. I already said that. Where is it being derived from? Is it something that is a mere causation of being itself, or is it something that is intrinsic about human nature, or is it something that we need as a prerequisite to exist in the world? So that's where we left off. And just to kind of reiterate this whole entire corpus, and what we're trying to figure out is we're trying to get to the bottom of, we want to think like how that deceptive person thinks. We want to know what it is that deceptive person knows. We want to be able to feel what that well-rounded fool feels. I want to know what makes someone, what kind of rationalizations go through that person's head in order to manipulate situations, to use other people instrumentally, and to then do whatever he wants to do. And why this question is even important, and why I think this series is important, is I think something very important, not only in culture today, but if we can find a language and we can use multiple and different disciplines, we can make philosophical points, if we can relate to psychological literature, if we can point out literature itself, if we can use the biblical text, if we can use phenomenology, if we can talk about how this archetype can exist in multiple different domains that aren't necessarily independent, but if we can find something that can exist in multiple different disciplines, I think then, and therefore, it's reasonable to suggest that that thing exists. And that's kind of like the marker for something existing outside of a Aristotelian or a Platonic way of viewing it. Something that can be proven in multiple different areas, independent of each other. It's kind of like the senses. If I can smell something, if I can touch it, if I can see it, if I can hear it, these are these senses, then therefore that's an indication of something being real. And that's kind of the more modern scientific empirical proof of something being real. But as I went over and as we talked about these deeper meanings away from that David Hume, away from that, or before we adopted this method, what was the criteria for something existing? Well, to Aristotle, let's go back to the intellecti, the telos plus the intellect, the ability to cognize something, to be able to recognize an object, not just in its present form, but its purpose, its divine purpose, its telos, why that thing exists and where exactly it's going. I think that's the fundamental purpose of something existing. It has to have its physical realm, and then it also has to have that sort of transcendent divine creation. Because if something exists outside of its creation, outside of its purpose, then that by definition is something false. It's something, not to say it's not real, is almost to undermine the actual problem. And I think that's kind of going in the culture today. We're saying, oh, that's not real, or this isn't real. It's not only something not being real and something being a lie are two different things. A lie is worse. Jordan Peterson has that, he says it's an anti-truth. Something just not being real, like, a movie. Like, is a movie real? Well, if it's CGI, then someone had to make it. Even if it's actors, well, the people are not fake. They're real people. Well, the conversations real in Star Wars? Well, the conversations real in whatever high grossing movie? Well, not really, because, they had a script and they're on camera and there's thousands of people on set or behind the scenes or orchestrating the whole entire thing. It's not like they're up there just freestyling. So in that way, it's not real. I had a friend, to go on a tangent here. I had this friend and he was so cynical about everything. And this is related to the well-rounded fool. He was so cynical about everything: movies, art, love, religion, God, sports, particularly with sports. And I found that so interesting that he was so hypercritical about sports. And the sad thing was, he obviously thought, all collegiate sports were scripted. And you can go on that whole entire rabbit hole if you want to about, scripted sports, about it all being fake. And there's and they insert gematria, that sort of Jewish numeric system that can add certain letters and numbers together, then therefore can have some sort of pattern, and then that pattern maps onto what happened in the actual world. But the whole entire franchise of that is a Gnostic romanticism, because you're starting with presuppositions. You're starting with something already. You're presupposing that there's something wrong. You're presupposing that there's some type of unknown Gnostic, in the capital G sense, mystery going on. So then you adopt a system like gematria, and then you selectively look for the evidence. So you will type in, they'll type in, Kobe Bryant's last name, and then plus the date he died, and then plus the age of his daughter. It's like, and then they'll say, oh, this number matched with this date, so therefore concluding this was a conspiracy. And it's quite sad that people fall for that kind of stuff. And I'm not lost as to why people fall for those things. But you have to ask yourself, okay, well, and this goes back to the deconstructionist problem. Why are you being selective about the dates you're pointing out? Why are you pointing out Kobe Bryant's birthday? Why don't you point out the day that he started walking? Why not look at the date where he joined the Lakers? Well, that's obviously a big day, but why would you not look at an irrelevant date? And the thing is, if you're so dedicated on finding patterns and understanding the truth, why are you being selective about the certain points that you're looking at? If you're just a mere literary critic, why are you always going to Milton? Why are you always going to Shakespeare? Why are you always going to C.S. Lewis? Why are you picking out these big names? Why not some other? Why not just pick some irrelevant date? You're being selective about the dates you're pointing out, and then you're applying that to a system that can reiterate your presupposition. Not science, not scientific, falsehood. That's false. It's false. It's not real. The geometric system is real. The numeric system is real. The events that occurred were real. But your telos, your reason why you're pursuing this endeavor in the first place, is a falsehood. It's not the same thing. Something being real, something being a lie are not the same thing. And I'm going to forget why I brought that up. Oh yeah, anyway, back to my friend. He was very cynical. So he oh, and he would go on this, he would spread the gospel of Demetria, and he would say, oh, you suckers are falling for sports. And I would tweet on Twitter, I watched basketball, I watched football, and he would, I would see him, I like studying his behavior. I would see him go out of his way to belittle people who were watching sports, or he would go out of his way to comment on other people's accounts who he didn't even follow, to shame them for watching sports, or you're wasting your time, or why are you watching that? It's fake, right? And he was always there, like a parasite, like a pathogen. He just wouldn't go away. So I talked to him on the phone for about 3 hours because I was really interested. I know I'm weird. And I was really interested in why he thought the way why he thinks. And I have a little bit of, I'm not a professional, I'm not anything, but I have a little bit of psychoanalytic background. So I was able to dig out some questions that's probably the most common person probably wouldn't be able to dig out. I just knew what I was doing in the context. And it turns out that he was, I kid you not, he was deeply, deeply, deeply traumatized as a kid because his father would pay more attention to sports than he would pay attention to him. When he told me that, it just all unraveled. Even if this numeric system was real, it immediately fell apart when I understood the roots, when you drew it back to why he's pursuing this particular. You can be paying attention to anything. We're going to get into Vervaeke's Relevance Realization a little bit. We're going to preview it today. You can read a million things you're so anti sports that it consumes your whole entire being. It's consuming your whole entire perception itself. That you're so against sports, you're so against movies, you're so against the mythology that it possesses your entire perception itself. So when he told me that he was deeply traumatized as a kid, I was like, okay, well, there's no reason why you can't, even if the sports were, let's say that, let's give the conspiracists their due. Let's say the sports are fake. Let's say the movies are not real. Let's say that all the religion was just a lie. Okay, cool. Does that therefore suggest that I shouldn't watch it? Well, a movie isn't necessarily real. Does it not mean that I cannot get something valuable from it? Does it not mean that just because, let's say, the sport was fake, the WWE, for example, we all know that's fake. It's one of the highest grossing athletic events to ever exist. And the kids know it's fake. The kids know Halloween is fake. The kid knows that he's not Batman when he puts on that costume. He knows he's not actually a firefighter. He knows that he's not actually Spider-Man when he dresses that way. Like, he knows that in a deep fundamental sense, because that symbol is drawing him to emulate that thing he sees. It's not about him knowing. This is going back to Piaget, when in the first developmental stage, I forgot what it's called, but when they're developing that, well, almost getting to that messianic stage, when they break from their groups and they're going on to be that individual, I think there's still a little bit of a desire to want to emulate a highest value, even in that messianic stage, because it came from that. Or if you look at it in a Freudian sense, it came from that phallic stage of being aware of your sexuality and being aware of you as a individual entity. So then you have to map yourself to something, and that space of vulnerability, that can be hijacked by a superhero. It can be not hijacked, but it can be inculcated, or it can be integrated in a union sense with a father figure or a mother. When the kid understands and grasps, that's the first thing they understand. Ducklings have that. When ducklings come out, they automatically know who the mother is. It's such a strange phenomenon. The first thing when they look at it, I forgot what the phenomenon is called scientifically, but when they come out, the first image that they see, that is their mother. And it's not that this their mother, that is their primary caretaker. That's who they attach themselves with. And I think that we don't ever get out that stage. And that stage is very vulnerable because it can work the same exact opposite. When you're in that vulnerable state and you come out into the actual world, you're being birthed. And the first thing that you see, the first thing that has a drastic and a life-changing effect on your perception, and that could be a traumatic experience, that becomes your highest value. And then that's why I knew that my friend was experiencing that type of trauma, and he was then projecting it, or he was, what's the word I'm looking for? The psychoanalytic word. He was displacing his hatred and his resentment for his father, and he was putting that on people who were genuinely interested and genuinely pursuing something that caused him the most amount of stress. And I think he knew that deep down inside. In the conversation, you can imagine how the conversation went sideways when we started talking about that. And later, I mean, he's not my friend anymore because he called me, he said, bro, you're an idiot and you're stupid. And then I think he unfollowed me. So that was that. That's how that friendship ended. But the moral of the story is that I don't care what the field is. I want to get to the bottom of it because there's something at the bottom. But anyway, we're going to just pick up right where we left off with Nietzsche and postmodernism and the death of God. What is actually going on now? So Nietzsche is asking these questions. What is truth? Is truth just the urge, or is it the urge for the self to be master of the senses? That's what he said in his letter. Are you just trying to be master of the senses? And if you're master of the senses, does that mean that you're assembling those senses or assembling those realities by whim? Is it by power? What is it being driven by? And these are interesting questions, because what is driving your perception itself? What is driving your conclusions? And there's always something at the bottom there. And similar to my friend, Nietzsche had a traumatic experience as well. When he was great friends with the composer Wagner, and he would put on plays in Germany. He was a very popular German figure back then. And one time, Nietzsche was in that auditorium, and Wagner had this show, and it was apparently rife with, I guess you could say, Eastern Orthodoxy, Christian symbolism, and that plagued Nietzsche because that was his highest value. So you can see how traumatic events can send people so off course. And not to say that Nietzsche wasn't always skeptical, because he was a professor at like 24 years old. I think it was 22, 24, somewhere around then. That traumatic experience of seeing his idol fail and err, that plagued him, and then he stormed out of the auditorium. And I think that was a changing moment in Nietzsche's philosophy, because he's seen art, because he was very fond of art. He's seen that even something like art can be plagued by a parasitic ideology. And I think that was a crucial moment for him. I think he befriended Wagner after that, to then go on and critique everything after that. So that makes you wonder, like, what is really going on behind closed doors? You never know. And there's always there's always an event like that. That's just questions to ask yourself. What is really going on behind closed doors? So another reason why I think Nietzsche is an important person is because I think, besides him encouraging us to think about truth and to think about, why we value the things we value, he's also making a very practical point. When you can deconstructing the actual sentences and the words and the syntaxes, I think it goes beyond just difference, and that later came with Jacques Derrida. But I think critiquing or asking questions about, or the relationship between language and truth, I think that's a very productive thing to ask as well. Nietzsche said, is the fundamental reality just words? And that's coming into being now with the ethic that I can say something, what I say is therefore true. This whole my truth Cartesian dualism going on here. What I say out my mouth is my truth. It's like my own personal God that I can create whenever I want. And that's an interesting question. Is it just because I said something, does that make it true in a biblical Genesis sort of way? And you have to ask yourself, it's like, okay, well, the reality is just words. If it's literally just the words on the page, okay, so now what? Like, how do I get out of that framework? And Nietzsche was stuck in this framework. Nietzsche was stuck in this Germanic romantic framework of words and subjects and objects. It's the Vervaekean critique. He was stuck in this rationalizing and trying to words and using words to critique the words. And this process of being stuck in this constant proposition is something that Professor John Vervaeke calls relevance realization. And that was the segue to what we're talking about. First, before we get back to Nietzsche, what relevance realization is something that I had a conversation with Vervaeke, and I'm going to promise to put the link in the end of this video. So, what the propositional tyranny is not just it's first of all rooted in cognitive science, but it can also be applied to something like philosophy. So you can see that, and this also is going on in the neuroscience realm about consciousness, and are we just computating? Is cognition computation? That debate is still going on, even though there's a heavy evidence to suggest that it's not. There's some sort of anticipating mechanism that's occurring in the sympathetic and parasympathetic systems that are constantly drawing our attention to something or receding our attention away from objects or people or noises or any type of stimuli. And these processes that are working together to draw away and to bring back something also called opponent processing. So the opponent processing dualistic system, you can see those, and those exist everywhere. They exist, for instance, neuropsychologically, they exist in the right, left hemisphere. The left usually is associated with cold, calculated decisions, planning, pre-planning, understanding, logic, reasoning, using that rigorous knowledge outside of a moral framework. That's what the left hemisphere in the brain is usually associated with, and the right is associated with that. I mean, you could say it's a narrative. Someone wrote a really great book called The Master and His Emissary. I really want to read it. I think it's by, I forgot the author. It's called The Master and His Emissary. I really want to read that book. The right is usually associated with projecting images and understanding images and using those images as kind of like a meme. You can kind of think that the head, the left, and the right hemisphere work together to create memes in a Dawkins sense. They form together into producing memes. So a meme is a picture associated with the right, plus the syntax of words, that would be the left, and they come together. They come together in an opponent processor array. So one is not, so you don't go to that homuncular problem, how Kant pointed out. They work together to construct, to then process something that then can be interpreted. It's not a meme, it's not just the words, and a meme is not just a artwork, it's something together. There's a picture and then there's words above that, and it's not that you read the sentence and then you look at the picture and then you put those together, then you say, oh, haha, it's you're seeing them simultaneously and they're working together. You're analyzing the picture and saying, okay, how's that picture related to the words? And you're looking at one word before the first one, and then it's a constant opponent processing system that is working together. You can see that opponent processing system even in our government. Not in our government. Well, in our political system. So we have usually the left, the liberal left, and we have the conservative right. It's not just that the right says something and the left says something and then one just wins by whim. No, it's a continual process. The right says, okay, well, we should not do this law because it's going against this particular amendment. And then the left over here, they're usually associated with, well, you're just saying that. Well, what about all these people over here? We're speaking for the people who don't have that genuine voice. And, okay, so who's right? Well, we don't actually know. The whole process, the purpose of this, you see people would criticize the two-party system was just ridiculous because the world on a very minute level is ran by opponent processing systems that are ran by bimodal opponent processor systems, male, female. This dichotomy of male, female. We have left, we have right. We have a right hemisphere, we have the left hemisphere. Sympathetic, parasympathetic. Conscious, subconscious. This is just basic law of polarity. We have good, bad, evil, good. We have light, darkness. Like these systems work together, and that process is the answer. That process is the answer. And what John Vervaeke is he wants to know what is guiding that ability for us to draw out that outside stimuli and to zone in on the one possible thing. How can we use that opponent processor system? What is driving that system? Because there's too many facts to pay attention to. And we, by definition, we know we can't do that because the amount of neurofirings that we have in our brain are less than the amount of actual items or possibilities that exist. So we know on a neurological level that we cannot inspect and interrogate every single object and every single possibility, because then we would reach what he refers to as combinatorial explosion. We would reach this too much stimuli. It's just too much. Like if you're in a primordial situation, if you're in a drastic situation and you see a big lurking figure in your hallway, and it's 3 a.m. and you just want to go to the bathroom, you see a big guy standing there like Michael Myers with a knife. You're not thinking about, I wonder if he's a liberal or conservative. You're not thinking about that right now. You're thinking, you see big figure, amygdala goes off, you're in fight or flight, and you want to you're trying to decrease the amount of variables in that particular situation. On the other hand, if you're with a significant other and they text you, if you were with dating someone for about, I don't know, a couple months, and they text you, I don't want to be with you anymore. Now it's the complete opposite. You're not going to just say, okay. You're going to be looking for variables. You're going to be saying, well, what happened? Well, what did I say? Well, what happened? Or what happened this? And what happened then? Or what, there was something I said? Was it something that she said? Was it me? Is it her? Is it my mom? Is it my dad? Is it my dog? Does she not like my pants? What's going on? You're looking for variables in that situation. And I think what John Vervaeke is onto is we want to know what is really guiding that? How do we know in certain situations to look for variables in a heuristic sense, to use that heuristic to alleviate combinatorial explosion? And in what situations do we need variables? He wants to know what is guiding that. So right now, I'm going to attempt to, and I don't have that up. Oh, crap. Well, we already talked about that, so we can just move on. And he really wants to know, what's guiding that process itself. And we're gonna come back to Vervaeke now, because so I just made that point that Nietzsche is not just, shooting at the hip. He's onto something that is actually rooted in cognitive science that obviously came later after his time. So he's onto something. He's not just spewing this nonsense. We're going to read some, I'm going to probably pronounce this word wrong. We're going to read some apophthegms from Beyond Good and Evil before we get into before we get into the other book he wrote, Will to Power. Well, not he wrote, that was aggregated by his sister and family. So we're going to read some of these quotes from Beyond Good and Evil. This is a really great book. I don't know if you can see this or not. This is actually Beyond Good and Evil. This is Essential Nietzsche. Beyond Good and Evil plus the Genealogy of Morals. So it's 2 books in one. Highly recommend. I'll leave the link in the description. This is a quote that, so I'm just going to read these just so you can have a deeper sense of Nietzsche and the way he thought. It's a good one. He who fights with monsters should be careful lest he thereby become a monster. And if thou gaze long into the abyss will also gaze into thee. Speaking of Vervaeke, I asked Vervaeke, I said, that quote stuck with me so much. I'm like, don't stare into the abyss. Don't look at monsters unless you want to become one. Like, damn, that's so true. And it would be so great if Nietzsche took his own advice. Don't plague your mind with something that you don't plague your mind with something to the point where, or try to remove something or avoid something to the point where it consumes your whole entire perception, lest he becomes a monster. Staring into the abyss will stare into you. That quote stuck with me so much. And I asked Vervaeke on my podcast, I said, I know it's a Nietzsche quote, and you're 1,000 times smarter than me. So what does that mean? And he added this to the most craziest twist, not really a twist, but he said that Nietzsche was actually doing a deviation of Eckhart. And Eckhart said, I'm going to screw this quote, so I'm just paraphrasing it. The eye that I see God is the same eye that God sees me. And when I heard this, it automatically went in my head. I'm like, okay, so the way that this is a quote about perception. The way that I see the world, the lens through which I see something is the same way that what I'm perceiving is seeing me. So if I go out to the world with this, everyone's just focused on their power, and they're just everyone's just focused on their own self, and nothing really matters, and everyone's just trying to preserve their own selfish wants, and no one really genuinely cares about anything, and life would be better if there was no humans at all. That's my perception. Then, well, how do I feel? How is that going to affect? Is this lens that I'm using helping me? Is it proving my proposition to be true? Is this a self-fulfilling prophecy? Is that really a monster? Or is the sports really scripted? Are those people really in love? Or is that I despise love, or I resent that so much that I'm going to create that self-fulfilling prophecy and make that thing what I want it to be? Are you going to stare into that abyss so that you can be it? It's the opposite of confronting and integrating something. It's disassociating yourself with it. Anderson Todd said something very smart about that as well. He said, the more I project, the more autonomous those things become. That's when he said that, I was like, damn, that is so brilliant. The more I project what I don't want, the more autonomous those avatars become. The more I disassociate myself with anything religious, the more I disassociate myself with anything that looks like art or looks like love or looks like something valuable, the more autonomous the more autonomy I give, the more power I give to those things. That which I refuse and fail to integrate plagues my perception. So that was tied into that quote, and it was brilliant. We're going to read one more, and then we're going to go into the will to power. This is a well-known one. Insanity in individuals is something rare, but in groups, parties, nations, and epochs, it is the rule. Now, I think there's speculation. I think his name was Lao Tzu. I think he said something like that, or some other politician maybe ripped off of Nietzsche and didn't quote him. But I think this is the original Nietzsche quote. Insanity in individuals is something rare, but in groups, parties, nations, and epochs, it is the rule. And when I hear that, I'm like, okay, what the hell does that mean? Insanity in individuals is something rare. Psychopaths, Machiavellians, and sociopaths, narcissists, the dark triad, they occupy about 3% of the population. So that is also a psychological fact that he's saying. It's not just a speculation. He's rooted. I don't know if he knew that or not, but it's rooted in fact. 3% of the world is psychopathic. So insanity in individuals on a statistical level is actually something rare. Thank God. But then he says in groups, in epochs, parties, political parties, it's the rule to be insane. You can think, okay, well, how does that work? One of my dreams is to do something that I'm really interested in. It's a hypothesis. I don't know if it's true or not, but I think I don't know if there's a way to calculate, there's a certain test to calculate the intelligence quotient of someone, the IQ test. I want to know if it's possible to test a group's IQ, because I really believe that the collective IQ of someone, of the individual, significantly plummets once they are placed inside of a group. And I want to conduct an experiment that proves this. I mean, not proves it, but once that tests this hypothesis. Because I really do think that people's intelligence, their ability to acquire facts, and their wisdom significantly drops once they are placed in a group. And I've always seen this, particularly in school, and more particularly with young males. Because when you put young boys in a group, they just, if you even in school, if you have family, they just go absolutely nuts. They just lose their minds. What's his name? I'm gonna forget it. Douglas Murray. He wrote a book called Madness in Crowds. And I think in there he talked about that urge, that demonic urge to want to cause mayhem once you're automatically placed inside of a group. Because once you're placed inside of a group, you kind of become generic. Like you're not really you anymore. You're kind of like an avatar of this group, especially if that group has a coherent doctrine, an ideology, something that robs the individual from his consciousness, reality, and his truth itself. So they just become like this faceless avatar of an ideologue. They just become something inhuman, and then therefore they just spew and regurgitate what they were indoctrinated to say and what they were indoctrinated to believe. Just become an NPC. Why does that happen when you get placed inside of a group? It's because the group the level of judgment can be dispersed. The bigger the group, the less the less and the more difficult it becomes to point out the cancer when you are in a group. The group facilitates ambiguity. The group facilitates pathology, if you almost think about it. Even on a medical level, you want to get that cancer out before the cells multiply and multiply and multiply. Then before we have to chop off your entire leg. Once the parasite, the ideology is dropped into this group, and not just affect that one person, it instantaneously affects how those two people interact with each other, and how those two people interact with each other is how affects how these other people react to each other. And then you have a group. Then what happens when you have a fragmented group of people who don't know how to be individuals and to associate with each other in a social way without a doctrine, without an ideology? What happens? They become fragmented. In that lack of individuality, that lack of sovereignty, in the most perverse, in the most ironic way, is what draws them together, because they're looking for that answer. They're looking for that truth. This is especially with gangs. They're looking for that certainty. They're looking for something. Where are we? We're lost. We just lost the First World War. Our whole entire country is in ruins. We just signed the Treaty of Versailles. We can't. Our military is pretty much pointless now. We're lost. We don't know what to do. Paul Tillich wrote a really good book called one of the best books I read. I made a video about that. The Courage to Be. And what Paul Tillich thought of collectivist ideologies was that there is a certain courage in a collectivist ideology. The courage is the courage to be as part. I have the courage to look at myself, fragmented self, and to stick myself to whatever this movement is. That courage to it's a sacrifice to self and to mold myself to something higher. That's how the Nazi movement started. How else did something like that start? And thank God Tillich was actually against the movement. Unlike Martin Heidegger, he was fully engulfed in it. And it's kind of funny. We're going to do a series later on how those two, how their two works interacted. It came to completely opposite manners. That courage to be as part, that fragmented group. They're looking for something. They need something. If you look, that's the complete opposite of the Judeo-Christian story. Christ says to carry your cross and to bear the suffering. I don't need anyone. I don't need a party. I don't need a group. I don't need a lead. I don't need a king. I don't need a pharaoh. I don't need some party, some bureaucracy to tell me what I can and can't do. I'm going to carry my cross. I'm going to take on the burden, that which is existence itself. That's an interesting quote. Very interesting quote. We are unable to affirm and to deny one and the same thing. This is a subjective empirical law, not the expression of any necessity, but only of an inability. If, according to Aristotle, the law of contradiction is the most certain of all principles, if it is the ultimate and most basic upon which every demonstrative proof rests, if the principle of every axiom lies in it, then one should consider all the more rigorously what presuppositions already lie at the bottom of it. Either it asserts something, if opposite attributes could not be ascribed to it. So he's pretty much, this is Jacques Derrida's difference. In that case, logic would be an imperative, not to know the true, but to posit and arrange a world that shall be called true by us. In short, the question remains open. Are the axioms of logic adequate to reality, or are they a means and measure for us to create reality, the concept reality, for ourselves? To affirm the former, one would, as already said, have to have a previous a priori knowledge of being, which is certainly not the case. The proposition therefore contains a no criterion of truth, but an imperative concerning that which should count as true. I think that's a really, really great place to stop. We're going to talk about more about truth and how these questions and how this way of thinking led to eventually the death of God and the rise of totalitarian regimes and ideologies that are still plaguing society today. So thank you for your time, and we'll see you in a few weeks for part 3. Thank you for your time.